All right, so I saw this post on the StarCraft Reddit a couple days ago, and I thought it was kind of interesting, so I want to talk about it. By the way, I'm gonna just pause donos while I talk about this, and I'll play them at the end. But anyways, this is okay. So SC2 has reached its Brood War state. Why risk a patch? So basically, there's a big patch coming out for StarCraft 2. There's basically one big patch a year that's about the cadence that they're doing it with right now, and sometimes little things can be fixed. But anyways, as we all know, Blizzard is not doing a fantastic job keeping up with either of the StarCrafts. So he posits this question, and this is this guy is like a GM level player, right? So it's not just some random noob that's written this. I just found that out, actually. I actually thought it was a random noob before, because most people that post are, but it's not. It's actually a player that's pretty good. So anyways, let's take a look. The first two paragraphs are all we really need to read. I remember when Brood War Remastered came out and Blizzard asked the Brood War pros if they want a new patch. They said, no, we know Brood War isn't perfectly balanced, but we don't want Blizzard to mess things up with the last big patch and then walk away forever. That's true. That's 100% factual. And that was a great choice by the Korean pros to take that stance. Because at this point, we get like maybe one ladder reset a year. And then here's what he's positing. I think we're at that point in StarCraft 2. A patch can do a lot more harm than good. And like Brood War, StarCraft 2 is balanced enough to keep the game balanced through maps and not balance patches. Okay. So, and then the rest here, he's kind of talking about how the patch is bad, stuff like that. I don't know why this got downvoted as much as it did. This is a very reasonable thing to talk about, I think. Yeah, so anyways, this is the part that I'm going to be talking about. Whether or not Blizzard will continue to patch, who knows? I think that they will with StarCraft 2 because there's still very active esports with it. But anyways, here, okay, so I think we're at that point in StarCraft 2. StarCraft 2 is balanced enough to keep the game balanced through maps and not balance patches. That's specifically what I want to talk about. I do not believe that to be the case. Okay, so let's talk about why I think that is absolutely untrue. Okay, so here, let's just kind of dive in. I have several different ideas as to why I don't think that we can do this. I think that StarCraft 2 needs patches. I think it needs semi-regular patches, even though once-a-year cadence is like okay. I think it would be better if there was a little bit more patching going on. Either way, one of the main things here is that StarCraft 2 gets reduced down to the best strategies a lot quicker than Brood War does. And this has to do with a lot of different factors. The main one, I would say, is the macro. Okay, so every pro in StarCraft 2 has extremely strong macro. Now, there's differences there is differentiation in StarCraft 2 macro, right? Like, at the pro level, you can find people that macro better and macro worse. Absolutely. I'm not saying otherwise there. But the level of the macro is high enough on everyone that's really good at the game that you very quickly start figuring out what works and what doesn't work, right? And the game goes towards longer games the longer one patch is out. So, like, historically, what we've seen, for instance, in Korea, right? So Korea is the region where I casted every game until this last Super Tournament. So I've seen, like, every pro game out there. What you would see, like, let's say that there's a new patch. A player like Stats would fall off a little bit because he plays a more solved metagame with his style. A player like Hero would rise up, right? And as the games get longer, you get the defensive macro players coming in and doing a bit better, right? This is a little bit of an oversimplification, but certainly this is something that has occurred. Now, when you look at the different levels that people have in macro, by the way, I want to give an example for this. In Brood War, let's look at like Snow versus another pro Protoss, right? Another ASL level Protoss. Snow's macro is worse than another ASL level Protoss, but his micro is much better with their Reavers, right? So just to throw this out there, right? And you can definitely see that. Whereas in StarCraft 2, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe Innovation Sioux mechanically are slightly better than everyone else, but you're kind of getting similar levels. It's harder to tell them apart. Anyways, let's jump away from that. I think I've beaten the dead horse on that one. One of the things about the macro is that there are more comeback mechanics because of how hard the macro is in Brood War. Like, let's say, for instance, you have you're a Zerg player and you have like 6 bases. It's like, yeah, you have 6 bases, man. You should win, but you have to jump around to 6 different locations to macro. They aren't all on one hotkey. Whereas if you have 6 bases as Zerg in StarCraft 2, it's all on one hotkey. You can be battling and you literally produce everything immediately, right? So the comeback, like, that's a big part of comeback mechanics that help better players to win regardless in StarCraft 1, right? Yeah, that's kind of like a big deal. Also, the micro is really different between the two games as well. And like, there's a little bit more depth of micro, I would say, available in Brood War. Like, if you look at mutas, right? Mutalisks in StarCraft 1 versus Mutalisks in StarCraft 2. In StarCraft 2, it's a more tactical unit. It's less about the actual micro of the unit and more about, like, tactically, what are you doing? Or strategically, what is your aim with these Mutalisks? As opposed to, I am so good with mutas, I kill you. The same can be seen, like, Vulture versus Hellion, things like that. Disruptor versus Reaver, right? There's, like, it's just, the micro is done differently, and it's much more intensive in a lot of ways. Now, there's really heavy micro stuff like splitting against Banelings. Like, yeah, that's very heavy and everything, but it's not the same type of active unit micro that we have in StarCraft 1 that kind of changes the way a game flows. But then there are some things, right? Like the Stalker is a much more interesting active unit than the Dragoon would be, for instance, for StarCraft 2. So this isn't like a complete rule there. But I think that when you look at that, where it's like you have more opportunities in StarCraft 1 to differentiate yourself macro-wise because the macro is harder, but then also you have to decide how much of the micro you want to do. So you have a huge differentiation, right? Like, you'll have Snow, like, really focusing on his Reavers and getting a huge amount of value, but he's banking a bit more minerals. That doesn't happen as much, right? Like in StarCraft 2, can you imagine? Like, Snow would be macroing perfectly while microing those Reavers. Okay, so now what I'm trying to aim at with describing this doesn't necessarily make StarCraft 2 like a worse game or a weaker game or anything, but more quickly we get everything reduced down, right? So we're figuring out more quickly, like, what are the absolute optimal strategies. It's like, even though you might have a very strong strategy in Brood War, you can't macro it perfectly and micro it perfectly. So there's a lot of play in there as to what you want to put your attention on and what you want to do, and how that's going to be executed and what your opponent is doing at that same exact time, right? Whereas in StarCraft 2, you're going to be like, yes, I can macro this perfectly while doing this attack, or very close to perfectly while doing this attack. So we figure out very quickly what the strongest strategies are going to be. And when I say very quickly, it might be months, right? It could take a while, but I'm saying it happens. Like, we do get it down, and you can see that like towards the end of the year in GSL, we'll have more and more games that it's like a 32-minute TVZ. Like, the TVZs start looking the same, right? Where it's like, okay, and now we have the Mass Thors and we have the Broodlords, and they're going to mine out, and we're fighting over one base, and that type of thing, right? So you see, when it boils down to that point, I think that's when a new patch becomes kind of important, right? Because that's going to mix it up, and that's going to reduce the overall game length and make it more volatile and make more choices and more things to discover for the StarCraft 2 pros. Very similar to this would be like the punishment. It's, when you're ahead, you can punish a little bit easier. Your whole army is kind of going where you want. The pathing is going to be better. Executing an attack is more easy with the StarCraft 2, right? And here's a big thing as well. The maps are more bland in StarCraft 2 for a few different reasons. Okay? StarCraft 2 has a much wider variety of abilities for movement than Brood War does. Okay, so in Brood War, most of the things that we see that help to balance maps have to do with mobility. That's like a big, big part of it. We get wild maps where it's like, okay, you know, I mean, if you look at some of the maps that we have coming up in the current ASL season, it's like, oh my God, there's like all these things that are kind of like islands. Whereas in StarCraft 2, it's a bigger choice in StarCraft 1 to get drops to move things into a location, right? To take like a new base. That's why we can have these much stranger maps. Whereas in StarCraft 2, it's like, well, Terran always has a medevac at this time. And then many, many medevacs in all the matchups. And then it's like with Zerg, it's like, well, it only costs, 50-50 to make a Dropper Lord. Or now we have Lair, we can just put a Nidus anywhere and transfer units. Or with Protoss, it's like, the Warp Prism is a pretty good unit. We get it in every single matchup, every single game. It's not like that in Brood War. Like, if you want to get Overlord drops, that's a big fucking deal. That's actually crazy if you see Overlord drops in a pro game. You're going to get a dropship? Okay, you can get one dropship, but probably not two unless it's Terran versus Terran. Or maybe against Zerg as an aggressive thing, but you can't take islands against them anyways because mutas are too good, right? Or like with Protoss, it's like, yeah, shuttles are pretty popular in some of the matchups, but it's just not the same mobility-wise, right? So that's part of the reason why we have some of that's part of what makes the maps really different in Brood War. And another part would be, like I was mentioning, the mobility of these units in StarCraft 2. Not only can they access those areas more easily, and you can find out the balance of that more easily because of that, also things like the Reaper jumping in, things like Blink Stalkers especially. I mean, that's a huge deal. Look at how many maps we've had over the past that became completely broken because 50 Blink Stalkers go into your main base. They hit your natural, and they walk this 2 feet this way and blink up into your main base, right? So I feel like the map designers have less to work with because of these things. You also have to be very careful, like Liberator spots. Is there too much dead air behind because of Liberators and Battle Cruisers and sitting a Warp Prism there and that type of thing? These are all huge considerations that don't really exist as much in Brood War. So it makes it, I think it hobbles the map designers quite a bit. Also, there's like 2 other things. First off, it's only 1v1 maps. That's a big deal, right? How many designs can you have for a 1-on-1 map? That definitely changes things quite a bit. What was the other one? I had one other thing I wanted to mention with that. So yeah, the 1-on-1, and I don't know, it'll come back to me. But I think that these things are really, really important to think about. And the fact that when you put all this together, you also have to consider the amount of pro games that are played. So, like, okay, in StarCraft 1, ASL gets to make the decision. Afrika TV is like, you know what, we're putting this crazy map 76 into the pool. There's no voting. There's no voting. It's just, that's what they want. It's there. Okay? In StarCraft 2, we have more of a community thing, more of a pro gamer feedback and stuff. And so it's like, can maps like that get through? Not as often, right? Like, we haven't had that many really crazy maps. It's just, it's something to consider that, like, if you can't get the maps through, map makers won't make them as much, right? Like, we've had some different ones. We've definitely had some different interesting maps over the years. One that I was thinking of actually was like Redshift, right? Like, this was kind of this looks like a Brood War map. And actually, just to throw it out there, Negative Zero has made a lot of like pro level Brood War maps as well. So I think he probably got some ideas from there. But we don't get maps that get through that are like that as much. Another thing I want to mention also is the amount of pro games that are played. So if you look at a given map pool, let's say a map pool is active for like 6 months for StarCraft 2. The amount of times every pro has to play on these maps exacerbates the difference that you're going to see with the balance of the map. Okay, so like, it's a lot harder to shift the balance there Whereas it's like, okay, so for Brood War, let's go Brood War here. I'm going to just jump into any ASL season. Okay, here we'll go ASL season 15, and let's wait. What? There's no text on this page. What? ASL. So stupid. TV, StarCraft League. Okay, let's just go into. Let's go into this one. ASL Season 5. Okay, let's find a stupid map. Sparkle. Okay? So this was actually a great season to choose because this was the most imbalanced map that we've ever had. This actually had like 0% Terran win rate. It's hilarious. Okay, who won the tournament? It was Rain. Let's see how many times Rain played Sparkle in this tournament. And by the way, then Sparkle was never used again. So let's find him. Rain, where are you? No? Was he seeded into the next round? There's Rain. So Rain here. Nope. Rain here. Nope. Okay, let's go to the bracket. Rain. Okay, Sparkle one time. Two times. Three times. So Rain had to play Sparkle 3 times totally. Right? Did I miss a match? Anyways, I think you're getting my point whether I missed one or not. No, he's not here. He's not there. Oh, wait, he played one more match here, sorry. Not Sparkle, don't worry. Anyways, Rain won the tournament, and he played Sparkle 3 times total, right? That's very different from StarCraft 2, like the way that tournaments work in StarCraft 2. So, if you're trying to balance through maps, that's going to be a lot harder. Because it's like, the way that maps are done in Brood War, because we say like, oh, it's balanced through maps, and it kind of is, a little bit. I think that part of the reason why that started was because of the Legend of the Fall, which is, in the Fall, they would make the maps really good for Protoss so they could get Protoss champions, because there weren't that many good Protoss players back in the day. Okay? So, like, yeah, that's balancing through maps. But would you accept that in StarCraft 2? I don't think it would be accepted. Think about this, right? Zerg has won, like, everything forever. So what if we just made maps they can't win on? By the way, that season 5, this is actually a season where this happened, where they made anti-Terran maps. This was the heaviest anti-Terran pool ever in a tournament. Like, to the point where Flash had an interview and talked about it, how it's like, it's crazy, because he had won like 3 ASLs in a row, and they're like, we can't let Terran win. And let me tell you, Terran did not win. Light 0-2, Rush 0-2. Look at this, Last and Mong out, Sharp out, C out. So only Mind advanced, and then we had Flash. So Flash and Mind. Isn't that funny? It's like, they destroyed it. So that is balancing through maps. I don't think this is even something you would necessarily want in StarCraft 2. But this is kind of the reality of it, right? And I think that when you kind of put all these things together, not only do I not think you could balance StarCraft 2 only through maps, well, the thing is you could whittle it down a little bit, but you're going to continue to get longer and longer games, right? And the best you might end up with is like either the game, it goes super long with one race favored. Like, I'm talking, let's say we don't have a patch for years. You're going to get situations where you go super long and one race is favored, or the other race is doing like a 50-50 all-in. It would most likely turn into something like that. So, yeah, that's kind of all I had. That's what I wanted to talk about. I think that this is a really valuable thing to think about and to talk about and to kind of go over, ideas for good ways to manage the balance overall. But yeah, I don't think it would work out for StarCraft 2. I think that patches really mix things up, and I think that it needs to continue to be patched for variety, for making it, I don't know, the game more interesting. I'm always enjoying watching and casting more after patches anyways. So anyways, I guess tell me what you think.